It is a single plot of earth, 35 acres of contested stone at the heart of Jerusalem. The most volatile, the most revered, the most explosive parcel of land on the planet. For the Jewish people, it is Har Habayit, the Temple Mount. Here stood the first and second temples, the axis of their universe. Here was the Holy of Holies, the dwelling place of God on earth. And here, tradition holds, the Messiah will one day walk. For Muslims, it is Haram al-Sharif, the noble sanctuary, the third holiest site in all of Islam. It is the ground from which the Prophet Muhammad is believed to have ascended to heaven on his night journey. Upon its surface stand the golden Dome of the Rock and the silver-domed Al-Aqsa Mosque, icons of a global faith. This is a land saturated with prayer and with blood, an absolute epicenter of faith and conflict. And beneath the ancient flagstones, worn smooth by the feet of millennia of pilgrims, lies the ultimate mystery. What does the earth conceal beneath the Temple Mount? What artifacts, what tombs, what royal archives or sacred scrolls might lie there, sealed and silent for 2,000 years? It is a question that haunts archaeologists, theologians. The darkness. Lie the lost archives of King Solomon himself. What if, resting in a hidden chamber, is the Ark of the Covenant? There is, however, one insurmountable problem. To dig here is impossible. This is not merely an archaeological site, it is the epicenter of a geopolitical earthquake. A single misplaced shovel, one rumor of excavation beneath the mosques, and the fragile peace could shatter into open war. The delicate status quo, established after 1967, forbids any alteration, any archaeological disturbance upon the mount itself. And so they dig at its edges. In the tunnels of the Western Wall, along the southern steps in the City of David, archaeologists conduct breathtaking excavations. They trace the very streets walked by Jesus. They unearth the personal seals of biblical kings. But they cannot touch the mountain. The secret remains inviolate. For decades, scholars have gazed upon this plateau, knowing that beneath their feet may lie the keys to solving the Bible's greatest enigmas. They have scanned the ground with radar. They have sifted through tons of earth illicitly removed from its slopes, searching for any hint, any trace. But the mountain itself remains a fortress of secrets. Yet it was not always so. Throughout history, there have been those who dared to try, men who risked everything to discover what lay beneath. The very legend of the Knights Templar is inextricably bound to this ground. Their formal name, the Poor Fellow Soldiers of Christ and of the Temple of Solomon, reveals their purpose. Their headquarters was the Al-Aqsa Mosque, which they believed to be the remnant of Solomon's temple. For 9 years, from 1119 to 1128, 9 knights were garrisoned there. The official story is that they were protecting pilgrims, yet 9 men cannot guard entire roads. Legend whispers a different tale, that for 9 years they rarely emerged into the sunlight because they were digging. They were searching for the Ark, and they found something. Something that transformed their poor order into the most powerful and wealthy institution in Europe. That is the legend. But where myth fades, a documented and far more audacious attempt begins. The year is 1909. Jerusalem is a sleepy provincial outpost of the Ottoman Empire. The world's attention is elsewhere. But a small group of wealthy and well-connected Europeans has arrived, armed with ancient maps and a conviction that they are on the verge of the greatest discovery in history. They are not knights, but they are driven by the same burning quest. The mountain waits, guarding its truths. It remains a place where the past is not dead, but is a living, breathing force capable of shaping the future. Perhaps its greatest treasure is not an object of gold or stone, but the enduring mystery itself, a void so profound it can be filled by the faith of millions, yet a secret so powerful its revelation could tear the world apart. In the year 1909, a peculiar party of British aristocrats, led by the audacious Captain Montague Parker, arrived in the ancient, combustible city of Jerusalem. They were not pilgrims, nor were they diplomats. They were treasure hunters, driven by a fantastical theory born from a cryptic deciphering of biblical codes. They believed, with the unshakable conviction of the obsessed, that the single greatest relic of the Old Testament, the Ark of the Covenant itself, lay hidden in a forgotten tunnel, directly beneath the gleaming dome of the rock. To dig in the heart of one of the world's most sacred sites would require more than permission. It would require a miracle of corruption. Parker provided it. Through staggering bribes paid to local Ottoman officials, he secured a firman, an imperial decree granting him the right to excavate. For 2 years, his team toiled in secrecy, their work largely confined to the dusty slopes of the City of David, the ancient core of Jerusalem. They moved earth, they tunneled into bedrock, they chased shadows. And they found nothing. As the months bled into years, desperation began to fester. Parker, facing failure and ruin, resolved to commit an act of unthinkable sacrilege. He approached the guardians of the Haram al-Sharif, the Temple Mount itself, and with promises of gold, he bought their silence. Under the velvet cloak of the Palestinian night, his team slipped past the sacred boundaries and into the hallowed precincts of the Dome of the Rock. They pried up the ancient flagstones of the shrine's floor, revealing the darkness below. They descended into the cave that cradles the foundation stone, the very rock from which the Prophet Muhammad is said to have ascended into heaven. There, in the Holy of Holies of Islam, surrounded by millennia of prayer and reverence, they began to dig. For several nights, the sound of their picks and shovels was the only prayer offered in that sacred space. But their conspiracy of silence was fragile. An observant guard, one whose loyalty had not been for sale, witnessed the desecration. He raised the alarm. A cry echoed through the alleys of the old city. Infidels were defiling the mosque. Jerusalem exploded. A furious riot erupted, a wave of righteous anger that threatened to engulf the entire city. Parker and his crew barely escaped with their lives. Tearing off their European clothes and donning the simple garb of Arab locals, they fled to the port of Jaffa. They scrambled aboard their yacht, its sails catching the wind just moments before the governor's men arrived on the docks to arrest them. The audacious gamble had not only failed, it had nearly ignited an international crisis. Its legacy was a scar of mistrust, and the mountain was forever closed to any who would seek its secrets. It was now understood. To dig there was suicide. And for decades, all eyes remained fixed on Jerusalem. The adventurers, the mystics, the archaeologists, all were convinced the ultimate prize lay beneath its golden dome. They were all looking in the wrong place. The real key, the most shocking and enigmatic document ever found relating to this ancient mystery, lay waiting just 50 kilometers away. It was not in a city, but in a cave, and it was not made of fragile leather or papyrus. It was forged from pure, imperishable metal. The story begins in the year 1947, in a landscape that could not be further from Jerusalem in spirit, the Judean desert. A dry, dead, and desolate expanse flanking the shores of the Dead Sea, the lowest point on the surface of the earth. Here, a young Bedouin shepherd, Muhammad Edhib, was searching for a stray goat. Spotting a dark fissure high on a cliff face, he cast a stone inside, hoping to startle the animal out. Instead of a bleat, he heard a sound that would change history: the sharp, resonant crack of shattering pottery. He scrambled up the treacherous rock face and squeezed through the opening. Inside, the air was thick with the dust of ages. In the oppressive darkness stood a series of tall clay jars. He opened one. Inside, wrapped in linen cloth, sealed with bitumen, were ancient scrolls. This was the discovery that would electrify the world. These were the Dead Sea Scrolls. Thousands of fragments constituting the oldest library ever unearthed. They were the legacy of a real days. They left behind their sacred laws, their apocalyptic prophecies, and, most precious of all, copies of the biblical books, Isaiah, Psalms, Deuteronomy, a full 1,000 years older than any version previously known to humankind. The world was enthralled. Scholars and archaeologists descended upon the desert, gripped by an archaeological fever. Over the next few years, a team led by the French priest and archaeologist Roland de Vaux began a methodical, painstaking search, exploring cave after cave along the brittle limestone cliffs. They were sifting through the remnants of a lost world, unaware that the greatest secrets were not always written on the scrolls they so desperately sought. The desert had revealed one miracle, but it was holding another in reserve, a testament not to faith, but to a treasure beyond imagination. Among the limestone cliffs that loom over the Dead Sea, a whisper of history was being unearthed. Across the desolate landscape, 11 caves would ultimately surrender their secrets, fragile time capsules sealed for nearly 2 millennia. There was Cave 1, the point of origin for this breathtaking discovery. There was Cave 2, and the astonishing Cave 4, which proved to be no mere hiding place, but a veritable library of ghosts, containing thousands of manuscript fragments from hundreds of different scrolls. Then, in the year 1952, an archaeological team turned its attention to Cave 3. It was different. A small, unassuming fissure in the rock. Its entrance appeared to have collapsed in antiquity, sealing it not with purpose, but by accident. Inside, the initial findings were unremarkable. The familiar pottery, typical of the Qumran settlement below. The heartbreaking remains of dozens of conventional scrolls, their papyrus and leather ravaged by time and moisture, having long ago surrendered to dust. It seemed a dead end, a minor footnote in a much grander story. But as the team neared the end of their excavation, in the furthest, darkest corner, buried beneath a fall of ancient rock, they found them. 2 objects, lying apart from the spectral debris of the other scrolls, rolled into tight cylinders, and they were made of metal. The excavators froze. This was impossible. Their hands, their minds, their entire professional experience was calibrated to the delicate, almost weightless fragility of papyrus, to the brittle, parchment-thin leather that could disintegrate with a careless touch. They were not accustomed to metal. What could this be? A piece of Roman armor? A component from some long-forgotten siege engine? Yet, these objects were not discarded wreckage. They had been carefully, deliberately rolled. They were scrolls. Scrolls hammered from almost pure copper. The discovery defied all logic. In the ancient world, who would undertake such a monumental task? To inscribe a text, not with cheap ink on a readily available surface, but to painstakingly hammer and chisel characters into sheets of solid metal. The expense would have been astronomical, the labor immense. Leather and papyrus were the currency of information. Copper was the currency of power. It was a strategic resource, the raw material for weapons of war, for coinage, for the essential tools of civilization. To use it for a book was an act of extreme, almost fanatical devotion. What kind of text demanded such permanence? What message was so vital that it needed to be shielded not only from the decay of time, but from the ravages of fire and water? And why was it here, in this place of pious austerity? The community at Qumran, believed to be the Essenes, were ascetics. They had fled the perceived corruption and wealth of Jerusalem, seeking purity in the wilderness. This scroll, this single object, was a fortune in itself. It was an irreconcilable contradiction, an anomaly that struck at the very heart of their understanding of this community. A riddle, buried within the greatest manuscript discovery of the age. The copper scrolls were immediately dispatched to Jerusalem, to the Rockefeller Museum, where the excitement of the find gave way to a new and profound frustration. The cave had surrendered its secret, but it refused to speak. The scientists were faced with a second, seemingly insurmountable problem. They could not read it. The scrolls were not merely old, they were chemically transformed. For 2,000 years, the moisture and mineral-rich air of the cave had worked upon the metal. The copper had oxidized, becoming incredibly brittle. The layers were fused together by a thick crust of corrosion. To simply unroll it, as one would a parchment scroll, would be to shatter it into a million unreadable pieces. Years passed. The scroll lay in the museum, a silent rebuke to the world's greatest minds. They circled it, debated, and theorized. They bombarded it with X-rays, hoping to peer through the layers, but the dense metal simply returned a featureless shadow. The academic world was split. Some argued it must be a hoax, an elaborate ritual object of blank copper sheets designed to mystify. Others suggested it was the work of a madman, a project of immense effort signifying nothing. But one man was obsessed. His name was John Allegro, a British scholar and philologist from Oxford. He was one of the original international team members assigned to the Dead Sea Scur. He was a defiant atheist in a team dominated by priests and theologians, and he had no time for patient reverence. He refused to wait for a miracle. He did not believe the scroll was empty. He was utterly convinced that this scroll, the strangest and most difficult of them all, held the true key to the Qumran mystery. Staring at the corroded surface, he believed he could see them, the faint, ghostly impressions of letters, a text desperate to be heard. The object in the museum was more than an artifact. It was the final testament of a people who believed their world was ending. It was a message deemed so critical it was entrusted not to fading ink, but to the very substance of the earth. A map, a list, a final prayer hammered into near immortality, a desperate attempt to make memory outlast oblivion. It stands as a profound symbol of the human need to preserve truth against the relentless tide of history, a silent testament to the idea that some secrets are worth more than metal, and some words are meant to endure forever. On the outer surface, where the copper was purest, letters emerged from the green patina, ghostly, hand-hammered impressions from a world long vanished. This was the Copper Scroll, and for a scholar named John Marco Allegro, it was an obsession that banished sleep. He understood a terrifying truth. If they could not force its secret, the scroll would die, its message entombed forever within its own corroded shell. And so, in the face of academic paralysis, he proposed something unthinkable. A radical, almost blasphemous act for any archaeologist. He suggested they cut it. Not unroll it, not gently coax it open, but violently dissect it. It was, he argued, the only way. If the scroll was a tube of impossibly fragile glass, then the solution was to scale. The scholarly community was appalled. The head of the international team, Roland Deveau, was vehemently opposed. To destroy a priceless, unique artifact, to take a blade to it, this was not science, it was vandalism, an act of barbarism dressed in the language of progress. But Allegro was relentless. He lobbied, he argued, he persuaded, and he found allies who understood that the risk of inaction was greater than the risk of action. In 1955, the Jordanian authorities, who then controlled the museum housing the Dead Sea Scrolls, granted their permission. A new, formidable question arose. Where on earth did the technology exist to slice a 2,000-year-old metal document with the precision required to save the text within? The answer was not in a museum, nor in a department of antiquities. Allegro turned to his alma mater, the University of Manchester. But he did not walk the hallowed halls of archaeology. He went to the Faculty of Technology, to the world of gears and engines. He came to Professor H. Wright Baker, a man who understood the tolerances of steel and the mechanics of motion. Baker built engines. He had no professional interest in the Bible, no stake in ancient theology, but he possessed a deep and abiding love for an impossible problem. Allegro showed him the photographs, explained the stakes. The engineer agreed. The scroll was transported to the United Kingdom in secrecy. Within the labs at Manchester, a techno-thriller began to unfold. Baker and his team constructed a machine for a singular, unprecedented purpose. It was an apparatus of breathtaking precision. A spindle, coated in soft rubber, was designed to cradle the brittle artifact, and poised above it, a saw. Not just any saw. It was a circular blade, thin as a razor and dusted with industrial diamonds, engineered to slice through the hardest of modern alloys. It would spin at thousands of revolutions per minute, while the scroll itself was fed towards it with agonizing slowness. The tension in the laboratory was a physical presence. History itself seemed to hold its breath. Allegro and Baker stood side by side, their faces obscured by protective goggles. The motor hummed to life, rising to a high-frequency scream as the diamond blade became a shimmering, invisible blur. With a surgeon's steadiness, Baker began to manually advance the scroll towards the blade. A wisp of smoke appeared. Then a smell filled the air, the acrid scent of hot metal mingled with something else. The dry, earthy perfume of 2,000-year-old dust. The first cut was complete. They killed the motor. The sudden silence was deafening, broken only by the sound of their own pounding hearts. With infinite care, they removed the first thin ring of copper. They looked inside. And there it was. Text. Clear, unambiguous, hammered into the inner surface. The gamble had paid off. They continued, slice after methodical slice. They dissected the scroll into 23 delicate strips, each one a perfect cross-section, revealing the hidden writing. Every new piece was immediately photographed, and Allegro, the only man in the room who could read the ancient Hebrew script, began to translate. It was in that moment that the blood drained from the scholars' faces. The revelation would send a shockwave through the world of biblical studies. Because this was not a sacred text. It contained no psalms, no prophecies, no theological debate. It was a list, a know of unimaginable things, a document not of faith, but of treasure. It spoke not of God, but of gold. And it suggested that hidden beneath the desert floor, the greatest treasure hoard in human history was waiting. It was a map to a treasure beyond imagining. The scholar's hands trembled as he stared at the text. He could not trust his own eyes. This was not a scroll of papyrus or parchment, but of thin, hammered copper, its surface corroded by the patient work of 2 millennia. The language was a peculiar form of Hebrew, an arid, legalistic dialect closer to the Mishnah than to the sweeping poetry of the biblical prophets. It was a cipher, dense with abbreviations and code words, a message meant only for the initiated. But the essence was terrifyingly clear. It was a list, a litany of 64 locations scattered across the Judean wilderness, and beside each entry, a stark inventory of what lay hidden there. In the ruins of the valley of Achor, beneath the steps that face east, buried 40 cubits deep, a chest of silver and its sacred vessels, a weight of 17 talents. In the cave of the old wash house, 65 bars of pure gold. In the cistern, to the east of the observation post, in jars of clay, 600 silver coins. Beneath the black stone at the cliff's edge, one vessel filled with silver and another filled with gold. The list went on, relentless in its detail. In a son's tomb within the drainpipe, location after location, a cryptic ledger of a nation's wealth, secreted away in the earth. It was not merely a list, it was the most detailed, the most staggering, the most magnificent catalogue of lost treasure in human history. Among the academic community, the revelation was met with stunned disbelief. The total accounting was simply overwhelming. If one were to add up the figures meticulously inscribed on the copper, the sum would approach 4,600 talents. In the ancient world, the talent was a unit of weight, roughly 30 to 35 kilograms. This was no small fortune. This was between 150 and 170 tons of precious metal, gold and silver. A king's ransom many times over, a fortune that could fund empires, valued today in the tens of billions of dollars. The question was immediate and profound. From where? How could a sect of ascetic hermits living a life of pious austerity in the desert possess such a fortune? These were the people of the Qumran community, the Essenes. They ate the simplest of foods, They wore the plainest of garments. They practiced ritual cleansing and communal prayer, renouncing the material world. They held a deep disdain for the perceived corruption of Jerusalem and its temple. This could not possibly be their treasure. So, whose was it? Slowly, painstakingly, the scholars and archaeologists began to connect the threads. They looked at the dating of the scroll, the results of radiocarbon analysis, the paleography of the script itself. Every piece of evidence pointed to a single, narrow window in time, the middle of the 1st century of the Common Era. And what was happening in Jerusalem in the middle of the 1st century? Catastrophe. An apocalyptic storm was gathering on the horizon. The shadow of the Roman eagle was falling across Judea, and the great Jewish revolt was about to erupt. In the year 66, Judea rose up against the might of Rome. In response, the Emperor Nero dispatched his most formidable general, Vespasian, and his son Titus to crush Roman legions' advance from the north. A wave of iron and fire burning everything in their path. The Qumran community, living by the shores of the Dead Sea, was among the first to be extinguished. They saw the end was near. In a desperate act of preservation, they hid their sacred library, hundreds of scrolls, in the surrounding caves. But what of Jerusalem? In Jerusalem stood the temple, the Second Temple, magnificently rebuilt by Herod the Great. It was one of the true wonders of the ancient world. Yet this temple was more than a center of religious life. It was the nation's bank, the central treasury of Judea. Within its vaults were stored not only the sacred golden vessels used for ritual, but the tithes and donations of a global Jewish diaspora, the deposits of the wealthy, the savings of ordinary families. It was a repository of unimaginable wealth. The historian Josephus, who was himself a participant in these tragic events, describes how the Romans, upon finally conquering the city, plundered the temple and carried away tons of gold, including the famed menorah, an act immortalized in stone on the Arch of Titus in Rome. And here, a desperate, tragic picture begins to form. The year is 70. The legions of Titus encircle Jerusalem. The city is starving. Within its walls, chaos reigns, factional infighting and civil war compounding the horror of the siege. The priests of the temple, the guardians of this sacred trust, can see the inevitable. The city will fall. The sanctuary will be desecrated. The treasure will be lost to the pagan invaders. In a final act of desperate faith, they make a choice. They will not allow the patrimony of their people to be melted down and stamped with the face of Caesar. They compile a list, etched not on fragile parchment, but on enduring copper, a guide for a future generation to find and reclaim what was lost. This scroll was not a record of ascetic wealth. It was the secret ledger of the Temple of Jerusalem itself. It is a treasure that has never been found, a map whose landmarks have been erased by time, a promise whispered from a world put to the sword, a testament to the belief that even in the face of total annihilation, something of value could be saved, hidden in the earth, waiting for a day of redemption that has not yet come. The dust on the horizon is not a storm. It is the inexorable advance of the Roman legions. For the priests of Jerusalem, watching from the city walls, the sight confirms a truth they have long feared. Their world is ending. The city is doomed. The sacred temple, the very heart of their faith, is marked for annihilation. And with it, their greatest material and spiritual treasure. The holy gold, the silver, the consecrated vessels will be seized, melted down in the forges of the conqueror, and shipped to Rome as plunder. They must save it. They must hide it. But how? Time has run out. There is no army to command, no fortress left to defend. All they possess is an intimate, ancestral knowledge of the land itself, its secret folds, its hidden hollows, its forgotten passages. And so, a final, desperate operation begins. Under the cloak of darkness, a clandestine procession moves through the besieged city. They are ghosts, carrying the weight of a nation's legacy. They bear not mere bullion, but the sacred tithes, the ceremonial instruments, the accumulated wealth of generations. They consign it all to the earth, scattering the hoard across dozens of locations, into the deep, cool recesses of caves, into the silent, stone-lined cisterns that honeycomb the ground beneath their feet, into the labyrinthine tunnels that snake under the ancient city, even into the solemnity of tombs. They choose every place they believe a Roman legionary, hungry for loot, would never think to look. But a new problem arises, one that transcends the immediate threat of Rome. How can this knowledge survive the men who hold it? They, the last priests, will surely perish in the coming slaughter. A record must be made, a map. Yet no ordinary medium will suffice. Papyrus, fragile as ash, would be found and burned by the invaders. Vellum, the skin of an animal, would surrender to the damp earth and the teeth of time. They needed a vessel for their secret that could outlast fire, water, and the slow, grinding erosion of centuries. A medium that could wait, if necessary, for an eternity. They chose copper. On thin, hammered sheets of metal, they began to chisel their final testament. It was not writing. It was an act of engraving hope itself into the unyielding earth. They detailed 64 distinct locations, creating the most improbable treasure map in human history. Here, the story takes a turn into the realm of scholarly conjecture. Who were the Essenes, the ascetic community living in the desert cliffs of Qumran? Perhaps they were not simply scribes and mystics. Perhaps they were guardians. It is a tantalizing theory that the priests of Jerusalem, seeking the most righteous hands in Judea, entrusted a copy of this copper list to them, and the Essenes, recognizing its supreme importance, hid it in what we now call Cave 3, set apart from their own holy scriptures, a document too secret, too explosive to be stored with the others. But if it is a map, why has no one ever found the treasure? This is the question that has haunted scholars since its discovery. The answer, when it dawned on them, was shocking. It is not a map in any modern sense. It is a cipher, a riddle, an enigma written for the initiated alone. There are no coordinates. The names Jerusalem and Temple are never mentioned. To write them would have been to hand the conqueror a key. Instead, the scroll speaks in a lost language of landmarks. It is a geography of memory. In the fortress, it reads, but which of Judea's 100 strongholds? Under the great pillar. Where did it stand? In the channel. Which one? It points to the entrance of the double tomb, and names places that are now just echoes on the wind. The ruins of Kahalit, the valley of Akkor, the spring of BK. We no longer know where these places are. 2,000 years of history have plowed this land. The Romans, masters of erasure, renamed cities and built new ones atop the old. Earthquakes have shifted the ground, and the desert has swallowed what remained. The landmarks are gone. The map, designed to be eternal, has been rendered almost useless by the very passage of time it was meant to defy. And yet, here, the mystery circles back upon itself, returning to the Temple Mount. For anyone who has studied the topography of ancient Jerusalem, many of the scroll's descriptions sound eerily familiar. In the cistern beneath the courtyard, in the tunnel leading to the steps. Many scholars, including the original firebrand translator John Allegro, became convinced. A vast portion of this treasure, at least 20 of the 64 caches, is not scattered across the barren wilderness. It is hidden directly beneath the stones of Jerusalem. Perhaps even now, it lies in sealed chambers deep below the Temple Mount itself. The irony is staggering. The scroll, discovered 50 kilometers away in a desert cave, acts as a boomerang, its inscriptions pointing back to the one place it could not be kept. It is an inventory of a lost world, a manifest of the sacred. The maverick John Allegro was consumed by this belief, an obsession that would define his life. He was certain the treasure was still there, waiting. And so the copper scroll remains, not just a guide to potential riches, but a testament to a final, defiant act of faith. The treasure it describes may be lost to the shifting landscape of history, its gold and silver forever beyond our reach. Or perhaps the true treasure was never the metal at all, but the enduring story of its concealment, a story of hope, hammered into a sheet of copper against the dying of the light. He shattered the consensus, breaking from an academic fraternity that had branded him a madman. His name was John Marco Allegro, and in his hands he held what he believed was the key to a nation's lost fortune. His own translation of the Copper Scroll. With this ghost of a map and a conviction bordering on obsession, he ventured into the blistering Judean wilderness in the 1960s. He would become the first, and perhaps the last, of the true Copper Scroll treasure hunters. Guided by the cryptic descriptions etched into oxidized metal, he identified several locations in the desert that he believed held the secret caches. He began to dig. The ancient silence of the landscape was shattered by the echo of dynamite blasts as he tore into the earth, desperate to unearth the truth. But the desert offered up nothing. Not a single talent of silver, not one golden coin. The whispers of ridicule from the halls of academia grew into a roar of public mockery. His reputation, once promising, lay in ruins. He would die in 1988, a man consumed by a quest that yielded only dust and disappointment. His failure, however, did not close the book on the treasure. It merely opened new chapters of speculation. Other scholars propose a far more brutal and efficient end to the story. They argue the treasure was found centuries ago, that the scroll was already an obsolete record at the very moment it was hidden. They point to the Roman conquest of Jerusalem in the year 70. The legions, they contend, did not simply pillage the city, they dismantled it. The historian Flavius Josephus writes with chilling clarity of how Roman soldiers tortured their captives, seeking the locations of hidden wealth. It is entirely possible, even probable, that under unimaginable duress, someone broke, someone talked, and the Romans, with methodical, brutal efficiency, would have moved from one loan of gold and silver were loaded onto carts bound for Rome. Yet another theory suggests a more clandestine recovery, a story of hope rather than despair. Perhaps a century or two after the fires of rebellion had cooled and the Roman presence had become a simple fact of life, the descendants of the very priests who hid the treasure returned. Moving in secret, under the cover of night, they may have used their ancestral knowledge to reclaim what was sacred, to bring their people's legacy out of the darkness. In this telling, the copper scroll, discovered in a cave near Qumran, is nothing more than a spare copy, a forgotten artifact of a mission long since completed. But a fourth theory persists, the most tantalizing of all. It whispers that the treasure is still there, that John Allegro was simply looking in the wrong places, that the Romans, for all their cruelty and precision, did not find everything. This theory holds that dozens of tons of precious metal and holy relics still lie buried in forgotten cisterns and dusty tunnels, waiting beneath the bustling streets of modern Jerusalem. And here the circle closes into a perfect, maddening paradox. We possess the most detailed treasure list in recorded history. It sits today in a museum in Amman, Jordan, meticulously cut into 23 fragile segments. We can read the words. We can touch the display case that holds them. But we cannot fully comprehend their meaning. We have the map, but the cipher, the key to its landmarks, is lost to time. The most agonizing part of this puzzle is that on Earth, where archaeology cannot go, sacred to two of the world's great religions, it is a geopolitical flashpoint, a place where the strike of a spade could ignite a global conflict. We are forbidden from looking precisely where. The copper scroll, therefore, is more than an archaeological curiosity. It is a profound jest of history, the ultimate enigma handed to us with a lock but no key. It is the silent engine behind modern political disputes, the unseen goal of tunnels dug in secret around the Temple Mount. When you hear of these excavations, know that they are searching for more than history, for more than biblical confirmation. Some are searching for the tangible wealth of a vanished kingdom, a treasure described on a sheet of copper found by a shepherd in a desert cave. The list is not the end of the story. It is the beginning of an investigation that has already spanned 2,000 years, a search that, by its very nature, may be destined to never find its end. It is a testament to the enduring power of a mystery, a whisper of unimaginable wealth that forces humanity to keep searching, even when the path forward is forever barred. In the ceaseless torrent of events, a signal sometimes cuts through the noise, a moment of clarity, a revelation that redefines all that came before. To remain vigilant, to stay attuned to these echoes of change, is to bear witness not just to history, but to the very pulse of human endeavor. For in the quiet spaces between one discovery and the next, entire worlds can be overlooked, their truths fading into silence, unheard.